You have to walk the talk. You have to be authentic as a leader. If you're not doing it, they see that.
It is entirely universal. There's other people who are going through this.
For me, a great leader needs to be able to marry three things: vision, systems, and people.
Welcome to Leadership Moments. If this is your first time, and if you are returning, thank you for your support.
This show is about leaders from all walks of life, leadership tips, and maybe even a little of what you wouldn't expect to help you in leadership.
We would appreciate it if you tell someone else about our podcast as we strive to support all leaders that want to just be better.
Let's get on with the show. Welcome back to Leadership Moments, the podcast where we uncover the real, the raw, and the remarkable lessons of leadership. And today we're diving into a topic that is not just timely, but timeless: crises. So how do leaders show up when the unexpected hits? How do we prepare ourselves and our organizations for turbulence that can't always be predicted? We know this, we saw this happen recently. So to help us answer these questions, I'm joined by my two extraordinary guests, fellow South Africans, which of course I love, co-authors of Becoming Good at Crises, a field guide for leaders. And between them, they've navigated some of the world's most high-stake situations, including the Cape Town drought and the COVID-19 pandemic. And they've distilled years of frontline insights into this book. So Peter and Gareth, so fantastic to have you with me, and welcome.
Thank you. Lovely to be here.
So I'm going to just jump right in because we have got so much to cover that we have to make sure we get it all in, okay? So let's start at the very beginning. So you've both lived through and studied crises. And I'm talking about crises that shook entire cities and institutions. Why did you feel compelled to write this book now? And what gap were you trying to fill for leaders?
I think, if I may, Gareth, if I may go first on this, what compelled us to do it now was that we both have a sense that crises are becoming more frequent and more complex and more dangerous. That's a big generalization, but I don't think it's wildly out of place. And we, having had these experiences of major existential crises, which you've referred to, and being both of us, as it turns out, this is what we discovered about each other as our friendship grew, was that we are both really interested in what difference leadership makes inside a major existential crisis, because there are lots of things making a difference. But what about leadership? And so we looked around and we realized that nobody has actually done what we've done. That doesn't make us very special, but it means that we're not simply retreading a path that others have already walked before. There are lots of books about disasters and emergencies and how to handle those and various kinds of crises, but ours is directed primarily at the leader who holds that unique responsibility for leading through an incredibly unpredictable phase like a major crisis. So that's, I think, what made us think there's a real need and a gap here, and we're interested to fill it.
Yeah. And it's fascinating because this is a continual struggle, right? Is how do you lead through crises? Lead through crises being the operative word. It's not manage, it's not the individuals, it's that how do you really help everybody get through it? So with it, you describe this book as a field guide. What does that mean in practice?
I think it is a step-by-step guide for leaders. It is practical. Peter and I decided to write a book that was on the shorter side because we want to encourage, obviously, leaders to pick it up. It comes from deep experience of actual crisis, and Peter and I have extracted those lessons, put them into a framework that is useful for any leader. So we are of the view that a leader could pick this up. They could know where to start. And during a crisis, there'll be significant guidance on how they'll navigate what we call the 4 phases of crisis.
And that's the most important part, because how many times do you read something and you're like, well, this is great, but I actually still don't know how to do it. You know what I mean? So I think really being able to give practical step by step, this is how you go ahead, and that then becomes habitual for leaders, because as you said, this is not going to happen once, it's going to keep happening, right? So were there moments in Cape Town or COVID when you personally thought, man, we might not make through this?
Yes, I certainly think during the drought, there were moments in mid to late 2017 when those of us in leadership positions in the city were very much of the view that we were going to run out of water. In other words, we would have to turn the reticulation system off. It's easy to look back at that crisis in hindsight, particularly for those who are not involved, and to think, oh, well, it was overdone. The crisis wasn't as big as we thought. But, we performance managed it, and we know what the numbers said. There were moments when that crisis not only felt like it was going to move up a few levels, but that it would arrive and gets considerably more severe within a matter of weeks. I think in the COVID one, look, we all lived through COVID. So I don't think the Cape Town experience would be all that unique compared to other cities around the world. But Peter and I obviously look at crisis from the point of view of a leader in an organization being confronted by a external shock event of some sorts. I think for COVID, it's interesting to reflect on sort of those early predictions from the modelers of the virus, which were considerably more severe than probably turned out to be, which ramped up the feeling of crisis quite considerably and increased the urgency. And then I think the other thing which is unique about COVID, I'm sure your experience in the United States would be different, is that it was a very long crisis. It dragged on, and there were decisions, I think, made by political leaders in countries as well, which need to be looked upon in hindsight, because I suspect many of those interventions lasted longer than they probably needed to at the end of the day. That was a crisis that felt like it was never going to end until it did.
When I heard you ask that question, the first place my mind went was an interview I did. I did 39 interviews with senior leaders about their response to the drought, about 6 to 9 months after the drought had broken and everything was going to be okay. And one of the most senior city leaders who I interviewed, I asked him, did you ever worry that we were really going to run out of water? And he said, yes, we did. And he suddenly, his voice sort of dropped. And I said, so what did you think about it? What was the discussion? And he paused and he said, well, we thought we may have to evacuate Cape Town. So that's only 4 million people. And my first thought when he said that was, where on earth to? Because the whole countryside was going through the drought. There was no place where lots of water was sitting. But if you genuinely are sitting in the responsible position, if you are a leader and you realize that your best efforts are not getting you to resolution, then you are obliged to think the unthinkable. And that was what really struck me as a leadership moment from him, was that he was having to contemplate the unthinkable prospect of evacuating 4 million people to goodness knows where.
Yeah, and what it also brings to mind, and I know we'll get there when we talk about your phases and that, but you got to look at all the options, right?
Yeah, that's your job. That is your responsibility.
It's your responsibility. So, that was the extreme option, but you do have to consider the extreme option in a crisis, because you're not sure, you're going to do your best to manage through it as a leader, but just saying my miles are going to go there because I don't want to go there. Doesn't mean you shouldn't be planning and thinking for it, right? So I know we'll get there, but it made me think like, wow, 4 million people, and to your point, like, where are they going to go? You have to be thinking about that, because that's a real like plan. You got to plan that, right? Especially for those that are going to resist. You know how this goes. People resist,
Oh,
right?
of course, yeah.
So there's a lot that goes into it. So then I want to ask you, so this word resilience, I love this word resilience. Why do you believe resilience has to be built well before a crisis, right? And why is that the leader's responsibility, meaning not something that they can delegate?
Well, I literally have that word in the title of my job here in the city of Cape Town, being the executive director of future planning and resilience. So, my broad definition of resilience is the ability for an organization. Let's talk about organizations here, to be able to adapt and survive and ultimately thrive, no matter what shock event or crisis is thrown at that organization. I think crisis accentuates vulnerabilities, so that those areas where you are weaker and have less adaptability are likely to be more pronounced during a crisis. And so resilience, and maybe a nicer way to talk about it in this context of this discussion, is really building strength. We need to attend to those things that we can in what we call peacetime, Peter and I, in our book, because you have the time in order to do it, to build that strength, to build that resilience, because you do not want those to be accentuated during crisis. But more importantly, you want to be able to pivot off that so that certain attributes of your organization actually become that which you can adapt and grow off as you navigate the crisis. With regards to it being a leader's responsibility, I would say that resilience is a strategic decision. We want to build an organization that is resilient, that is strong. And strategy, in my mind, is very much in the domain of a leader. And hence, I would say that's why I would put it in the leader's responsibility. Of course, components can be delegated. Leaders will always do that. But overall responsibility for building strength, that sounds like a leader's job.
100%. It actually reminds me, uh, last year I spent a lot of time with some of the government executives here, and they had done in Austin, they had done a sort of emergency planning. Gareth, this is back to your point, and I really loved your point, which is about the plan, right? The plan in peacetime, where they do simulation of the back of the emergency vehicle. So typically what happens is, there's times where you have this critical where maybe there's 20 or 30 people that are hurt, and now all of a sudden you've got to work in the back of that vehicle, right? And you don't know where everything is, because you don't get to do that real emergency urgent stuff like that. Maybe you're treating one person at a time, right? So what they do is they do the simulation where they get to know, well, that's where the oxygen is, this is where so that they're working faster, they're working quicker, and that saves lives. Every second in that kind of disaster saves lives. So to your point, Gareth, that is so spot on, because the planning to be prepared during the crisis, it's like you got to know the battlefield. You have to plan for it, right? You're not going to send men to war who can't shoot the gun, or who don't have the physical capability to fight. Not that I want to talk about war, because that's definitely not something.
Can I just jump in there, Tracy? Because I think you've just surfaced one of the really critical distinctions that we make early on in the book between just what you've described now, which is where you have people who have a particular technically defined job to do when a particular kind of emergency, like a fire or a major accident or a building collapsing. There are people who've trained and trained and trained and are expected to be first responders in those situations. A leader, someone who's a CEO or the general manager of a large plant or whatever, they're not expected to have those particular skills. They should have some of those people to hand. But their particular training is of a completely different order, because it's preparing them to be, as Gareth says, adaptive in order to be resilient. Adaptive when chaos erupts and your emergency teams rush out, and hopefully they do know the inside of the emergency vehicle well enough, etc. But that's not the leader's place. The leader's place is at a more strategic level and viewpoint.
Yes, for sure. But they are thinking about all those things, forward thinking, which is why they're calmer in the crises. Because ideally, because you don't want to be chasing the leader into the fire when he's freaking out. I just think about that. No one's going to follow him. Let me tell you.
No, good point.
Yeah. One other thing that you talk about too, though, that really intrigued me was this attitude of excellence. Right? It's something we all strive for. Hard to get there. But in this case, what does excellence in crisis leadership actually look like?
What I think we're talking about with excellence here is a personal commitment, and you could think of it as a lifelong commitment by your leader to excellence in what they do. And we hope, we wrote this book assuming that the leader who's reading it actually wants to be a leader, isn't somebody who's risen there by mistake and is rather dreading leading, but someone who actually most of their life have found themselves in leadership positions of one sort or another, in a sports team, in their classroom, and then in an organization. And so the excellence we're talking about is that thing that motivates the best leaders, because they're not satisfied unless they felt they have really led well and they welcome the challenges that leadership throws up, including, we hope, major crises. It's a very personal challenge. It's like a gauntlet being thrown down by the universe saying, okay, you want to lead? Well, lead through this. And the best leaders roll up their sleeves. They may feel anxious. They may actually be at moments quite scared. I mean, as Gareth was saying, if your city is about to run out of water, you're right to be scared. But as a leader, you're also expected to say, okay, but the buck stops with me and my team. Let's get busy.
Peter, I don't think I can add much to what you've said. I think we have so many mediocre leaders in the world today that the emphasis on excellence, I think, is very, very important in the context of our book. We're literally talking here about making sure that organizations are able to survive in a crisis. Nothing short of excellence is called upon, and hence we need to call it out as the authors of our book.
Now, you write about the uncertainty and the confusion are not byproducts of a crisis, but rather they're the hallmark. And I really loved that distinction. How should leaders reframe their mindset when everything feels unpredictable?
For me, it hinges around their willingness to embrace, allow uncertainty, and simply not knowing what is the right thing to do. You know how in both the private and the public sector, if you want to rise through the ranks, if you want to achieve and be noted as someone who is really good, then you're expected to get things right, and there are hurdles that you can see ahead of you, and you're expected to jump through them with ease, etc. Whereas in a crisis, you have no clue what's going to be thrown at you next. And that demands a different kind of confidence, self-confidence, where it says, I'm probably going to get this wrong, but it is my job to make my best effort, consult, pull together the best I can, and we may have to change our minds again tomorrow. So big decision today, and then we discover fresh information, do it differently tomorrow, and so on. So that's a mindset that is not normally asked for of executives in organizations. It's much more linear.
Yeah. But I really appreciate that. Really what you're talking about there is I'm going to go with the information I have today because I have to in this, in this situation. If more information becomes available tomorrow, or if we find we have to pivot tomorrow, we're going to do that, but we're going to keep moving forward, is what I'm hearing, right? So they're taking the risk on, knowing they may not have all the information that they need. Gareth, to your point, mediocrity doesn't allow for that. Mediocrity means I'm just going to sit back and I'm going to see what happens, right? Whereas I think the expectation of a leader is, no, you're not going to sit back and see what happens. You're going to take what you have and you're going to keep moving forward, because you've got to get everybody through this crisis. You've got to manage through the crises. Don't have the crises manage you.
And I would say here that one of the most important things that we call on leaders to do, we actually talk about it in what we call phase 2 of the book, is to declare the crisis and own it. Because that's really the antidote to that leader that you were speaking about, who is spinning their wheels, not wanting to do anything. It's a big moment for a leader to say, this is a crisis, accepting that there's a small chance they may be wrong and they would lose face by doing it, but it requires bravery. This is a crisis. I may not know everything I need to know as of now, but we are going to do something together. Follow me on this journey, and we will update the information and the scenarios as we go along. That is very, very important for a leader to say, I am the person who's going to run this crisis.
Yeah. And I do want to get into those 4 phases, because I think this is so valuable for everyone in our audience to really just have them in a very, quick, just walk through that. But before I get there, you talk about this, you outline these, 7 signs that an organization is entering crisis, right? Could you just walk us through just sort of a couple of those that leaders often miss?
The ones that I think that are slightly left of center, you wouldn't normally think of these, are that the number of decisions you're having to make as a leader. I mean, a leader spend all day, every day making decisions. That's their job. But you can feel the number ratcheting up, and you're starting to not be able to get to all the decisions you're supposed to make. And that's a sign to you that there's something happening to normal. Normal is teetering on the edge. And that there's, to go back to what we were saying just now, there's also a much greater level of uncertainty. You don't know how to take a decision, and then the next decision is the same, because there are too many variables and they're moving too quickly. So when you get that feeling that I thought I was quite good at taking decisions, but I'm struggling, that's a really good sign that normal is shifting and maybe evaporating.
There is you lack some confidence. It's fine for leaders to be vulnerable, and you look around you and you're like, this isn't what I have around me at this point in time, is not the regular way of doing business. So there's a sense of vulnerability that you are feeling at this point in time, and it's worth trying to be curious about why that is the case. And I mean, that might be a good segue into phase 1 of our book, if you don't mind me sort of just jumping there, because we argue, Peter and I, that there are 6 capabilities that every leader should build during peacetime. And those are supply chain adaptability, the IS&T strength of your organization, that's your information technology, your data systems as well. How quickly is your data movable? Can you connect it with other streams of data? Is very, very important. Project execution abilities. Do you have protocols, people around you who, irrespective of what the challenge is, can be pointed at a particular area to turn strategy into projects for execution? Very, very important. Communication protocols. Are these in place? Are you able to segment the market and how you're going to communicate in different ways. And the last thing is collaboration and partnership. Because if the leader, to sort of start in where I started the point, is sitting around and going, this feels different, they need to be able to go to a place where they have already built capabilities and say, whatever this challenge is, I'm going to leverage off of these capabilities now to build my crisis response. That's phase one of how to become good at leading in crisis.
If I just rattle through the first two, we've talked a bit about both of them indirectly. So the first two phases are peacetime, if you like, when there isn't a crisis, which is the hardest in a way, because that's when you've got so many other things you'd rather do than prepare for a crisis. I mean, who would? But in our view, that is priceless time, because there are things you can build there, like trust, for example, and culture in your organization, the culture of trust and easy communication between levels and so on. You can't build that in the middle of a crisis. If it's there, fantastic. If it's not there, then you are handicapped. So it's those subtle things like that that are best done in peacetime. Then the second phase is what we call when the wave begins to break. And this is really what Gareth was talking about just now, where you're picking up signals from the outside world, maybe from your suppliers, from your customers, that they're really worried about something, your staff. And that's the point where you have to, first of all, put out your antennae as far as possible and gather relevant data fast to find out, is this a thing? And if it is, you need to set some people to working out what are the likely impacts on our organization of this thing, insofar as we can see what it is. Because as we've been talking about, major crises constantly change and morph. But to your best estimate, you've got to be able to say, okay, because otherwise, what are you working to when you gather your team and you say, okay, there's a crisis. We have to preserve the integrity of this organization and its basic functions as far as possible during whatever this is going to be. You can't do that unless you know what the risks are, what's coming at you, and what damage it could do. So there's that. And then the third one, the one I'll end on here for this stage, is the critical thing of picking your crisis management team. Because if you're the CEO of any organization, you will have your regular executive group that work with you on a weekly basis. Some of those people you absolutely would want to have with you in your crisis management team, but there will possibly be other people outside that group who you know are exactly the kind of person, either because of their skills or their temperament, who you want in your crisis management team. And there may be one or two in your regular team who you think, they're not going to be my biggest help, or I really want them managing the everyday business in as much as they can. So I don't want them trying to split their efforts. Me and my team, my crisis management team, we're going to be focusing on a daily basis, talking to each other all the time to stay on top of this crisis. So picking that team is a real success factor.
Then we have phase 3, which is the turbulence. And as you say, there are 4 phases. So phase 3 is, I'll just pick out a few things here that are important. So the one is to attend closely to data and to adapt, because at this point, the crisis is changing direction. You have your data in place and you need to be performance managing and looking for whether your strategy is in fact working, whether you need to make adaptations against the data. Then one of the most important points Peter and I raise in the book is around the need to expect crises within the crisis. So often what hits the organization, the primary crisis, is not necessarily the crisis that is going to cripple the organization. So, think here, for example, of COVID. COVID manifested as a public health crisis, and everyone responded to. But organizations felt it through its secondary crisis effects. They felt it through cash flow problems, for example, or the unavailability of their own team members due to the impacts of non-pharmaceutical interventions. And so constantly look out for the crises within the crises. You might be excellent at keeping your eye on the main one, but actually you're going to get crippled by the secondary ones. And then communicate in a way that builds trust. You have your stakeholders, could even include your competitors. Sometimes surviving together is very, very important in a crisis. But, Peter and I write extensively about methods around communication during this stage because people want to know what is happening. We learned this in Cape Town through the drought. People became more water literate, and so stakeholders wanted to understand, how are we doing and when will it end? That's a crucial question. Moving quickly on to the last phase, that's really about recovery and learning. Peter and I wrote this book because we learned so much about the two crises, which are the backdrop to this book. And I won't focus on everything here other than to say it's important for the leader to also declare that the crisis is over. And I used previously an example from COVID where it just seemed to drag on. It created major anxiety. But the leader needs to say it is over. And that is a psychologically important moment for your crisis team who might have been toiling for months. In some cases of crises I've been involved in more than a year, so that they know that they can breathe and that they can be recovering and that there can be space for learning as well. And importantly, also appreciation, saying thank you to people who gave everything to be with you while you navigated to safety.
And my gosh, you just touched on something, and I love that crisis within the crisis. I really love that as part of your phase 3. I think back to COVID. One of the things that we dealt with around the world was single people stuck at home who then had mental well-being and mental health issues because they were we're social creatures, right? We're like lions, we've got to be around everybody, and so we're stuck at home and we're in our little boxes, and people freaked out. I mean, people were not responding well to that over a period of time, because at first you're fine with it, right? But then, over a period of time, that depression starts to set in, the mental state. So that was something just with it, just Gareth, to your point, the crisis in the crisis. Who would have expected that as an example, right? You know, Second thing is small business. You know, the companies, some of the larger business can sustain through. They might have had liquid assets and the capital to sustain. Small businesses went out of business. Some of them have been in business 30 years. What do you do when those, small business is a major engine for the whole world, right? There's a lot of small business that drives our economy. And so, putting in the steps to support those small businesses, uh, you know, which, you want to, because that is a livelihood, majority of your livelihood in many of these communities, right?
So if I could just take that very example you've just surfaced, which I think is an excellent one, Tracy Ann, of the impact on small businesses. So if in my dream world, every national government that, as we all did, went through COVID, would take a pause and perhaps with some professional help, just think back through what were these crises within a crisis that we could have thought, that we could have foreseen, even if it was just a few days ahead of when we did, because that help for small businesses. What matters is timing. It's not necessarily the amount of money. It's the fact that you get a message out to them quickly. We're not going to let you go down if we can possibly help it. So hang in there. Whereas I think a lot of small businesses around the world, I was talking to leaders in many countries during COVID, and a lot of small businesses were simply left waiting to find out, are we on government's radar? So actually, if every government read our book, the world would be a better place, because they would realize that these are rational likelihoods, that big impact, whether it's a weather event or a virus, whatever, they are going to have fairly expectable disruptive effects on commerce and finance and, as you say, mental health. So now we've been through COVID, there's a lot of latent wisdom, but it's kind of been allowed to sort of float away and get lost in memory, I think.
But Peter, that's why I feel so compelled to have you and Gareth on the podcast today, because I really do believe in the value system, which is that leaders are there to lead through crises, right? And that is our responsibility. We have accountability to our companies, our communities to do that, right? And we need to be in a position where we are prepared to do that. So the book, to me, gives you the template to say, hey, like, here's what you need to do. And just the advice you gave. Did anybody go back after COVID and say, what did we learn? Therefore, what should we put in from an infrastructure perspective so this doesn't happen again? It will, a crisis will happen. But the lessons you learn need to be new lessons, not lessons that you should have already learned and already put in the correct, to your point, supply chain, whether it's commercial, all those things, right? As well as the human element, okay? Because we're always dealing with that. If somebody in our audience, wanted to say, okay, Gareth and Peter, what's my first step? Give me, what do I need to do? I want to become this leader that can lead through crises. What do I need to do? Read the book. I'm going to say read the book. Okay.
Read the book, watch the movie. Yep. Now, I tell you what, I felt it's slightly, and perhaps an unusual way to answer the question, but for me, the one thing I would want every leader who's listening to this to do is to decide that they are going to be excellent at leading in crisis. Because without that, it's somewhere down your agenda, and you can put it off and put it off, and peacetime is wasted. If you've decided that you are going to be excellent, rather like people go and do MBAs and executive MBAs and they get further degrees and so on, because they've decided, I want to be really good at this thing. Well, we're saying nothing is more worth being good at than being really good at leading your organization, your team, your people through a crisis.
I would say you start, you decide, I'm going to be good at this, because that's the key challenge. In the first 2 pages of our book, I'm going to be good at crisis. It is a deliberate choice to be good at this. And it is not necessarily high on everything that our current leadership organizations, NGOs, and governments are thinking about. But because Peter and I think that more crises are on the horizon, because we want our organizations to survive and thrive in that context and to provide the value that they do, this now becomes a critical component of a leader's role. But it starts with the choice to be good at it. And we think that our book is an excellent start.
There's no downside, meaning if you can lead through a crisis, every day that without a crisis becomes a really great day. because you become really good at what you do, okay?
You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right.
You're building leadership muscle, right?
Yeah, a crisis. I mean, we say this in a different way as well. That the there's 6 capabilities that Gareth listed. If you build strength in each of those, you've got a very robust organization, peacetime or crisis. So you cannot lose by seeing crisis. But there's something psychological, I think, about you just would rather not look. I mean, I say a lot of people would rather not look over in that direction because they're afraid they might not be up to it or they might fail and so on. Well, this is a question for you as a leader. If you take yourself seriously as a leader, have a go at looking at it and saying, what if it was really, really dark, dangerous, and scary? Who else is going to walk into it if not me? I'm the big thing around here. That's what I wanted to do. That's how I've got to this place.
With that, it's just been fantastic to have both of you on the show. Is there any last advice that you would like to give our audience?
Embrace it. It's coming anyway, whatever it is. And if you're alive, you're in it.
Be excellent. Strive for excellence. It's important, and leaders need to develop. And this is an area that I think we can all develop in even more.
So thank you for being with us today. I hope that you enjoyed Peter and Gareth's discussion around crises as much as I did. And as always, thank you for joining us on Leadership Moments. If today's conversation resonated with you, please share the episode with other leaders. We're out on YouTube as well as all of the different social platforms about leaders navigating through turbulent times and really becoming mastery through that crises. So until next time, keep leading with courage and clarity. Thanks again, Peter and Gareth. If you enjoyed the show, please go to leadershipmomentspodcast.com to subscribe to the podcast or on your favorite player, as well as follow us on Instagram and LinkedIn.
You can also send us a message on what you like and don't like, or what guest you want us to have on the show.
So until next time,
This is Stacey Castor, and what doesn't challenge you won't change you.
and I'm Tracy Ann Palmer. Be the change you wish to see in the world.